Welcome members and members of the public to this subcommittee meeting of the Cabinet. I'm Chris Ward, the Director of Finance for the Council, and I'm opening the meeting in the absence of the Chair and Leader of the Council, Gerald Vernon-Jackson, as he has some personal reasons why he's unable to attend today. Before we move into the agenda proper, we need to appoint a Chair for this meeting. I'd like to suggest that Chair is Councillor Ben Dowling, but of course it's up to you members to propose and second Councillor Dowling as the Chair.
I propose Councillor Ben Dowling.
Do we have a seconder from the voting members?
Happy to second.
Thank you. So I'll now formally pass over to Councillor Ben Dowling to chair the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, members. So yes, in the absence of the leader, I'm afraid you're stuck with me for the duration of the meeting, but I will do my best to fill his shoes. So a bit of housekeeping as always, just for the awareness of anybody watching from home. We've done everything we can to create a COVID-secure environment for these meetings. Unfortunately, the government doesn't allow us to do these meetings digitally, which is why we're doing them in person in order for it to be a legally binding meeting. Everyone attending the meeting has done a lateral flow test within the last 48 hours, is doing their best to adhere to 2 metre social distancing, using the NHS Track and Trace app, as well as a one-way system and good air flow in the meeting room. And everyone is being sat according to green spots so that none of us can get it wrong. Should the fire alarm sound, we should leave the building in an orderly manner and meet in not in the square, but down King Henry Street at the bottom by the University's Park building. And please note that the meeting is being recorded. The first item on the agenda is apologies. We've already received apologies from Councillor Gerald Vernon-Jackson, who is being replaced by Councillor Hugh Mason. Thank you, Councillor Mason. And it also, on my paperwork, says Councillor Barrett's not here, but she's looking right at me, so I'm going to assume that's not accurate. And welcome to members from opposition groups as well. Before we move on to the detail of the agenda, can we just do quick introductions, should anyone be watching that isn't familiar with who we all are? Peter?
Solicitor.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
Councillor Ryan Brent, Deputy Group Leader of the Conservative Group.
Councillor Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward, substituting for Councillor Cal Corkery.
Councillor Hugh Mason, a reserve member of this group, and I am the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development.
Karen Martin from Democratic Services.
Kimberly Barrett, Councillor for Milton Ward and Cabinet Member for Climate Change and the Green Recovery. Councillor Susie Horton, Member of this group and Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Tom Southall, Assistant Director of Property and Investment, but I'm here in my capacity as Director of Ravelin Housing Limited today.
Wayne Layton, I'm a Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council, but I'm here in my capacity as a Director of Ravelin Housing Limited.
Sophie Mallon, Head of Commercial Legal Services.
Councillor Claire UD, I'm a voting member of this group under the Portsmouth Progressive People Party.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you. I'm sure some people will notice that some are here in one capacity that's not their normal capacity, and if not already familiar, that will become clearer as we progress through the meeting. So thank you, colleagues. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations they need to declare? Yeah.
While I'm the Director of Regeneration today, I'm managing a conflict as the Director of Ravelin Group, but I've been told that it's not an issue for today.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think everybody else has declared what they need to declare. Thank you. Okay, so item 3, the council as a company owner. It's quite a lengthy report, but I think Sophie's going to walk us through things.
Thank you. The report talks around the background to the establishment of this subcommittee. The detail is set out in the July 2020 Cabinet report, which talked around the formation and the rationale for setting up the subcommittee. The report itself talks around a number of examples that have led the authority, in consultation with the city solicitor, to come to the formation of the subcommittee, specifically in relation to legal advice and commercial advice from local partnerships. The importance of having a well-formed, trained and commercially aware political oversight of a local authority through a separate subcommittee flows throughout the report. The report talks around the necessary steps in ensuring the 7 companies the authority own and operate have a forum to which oversight and scrutiny can perform adequately. As such, the report sets out recommendations in order for the January meeting to have all of those PCC companies produce a report to come to that meet, and for the city solicitor to engage with each of those companies between now and then to ensure those reports are in the proper form, and finally to engage with local partnerships, provide commercial advice to the subcommittee as necessary. I wasn't going to go into the detail of the report because essentially we've gone through a number of briefings on this, but if anyone has any specific questions, do let me know.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm happy to take questions, comments from members in a second. I think we've had quite extensive conversation about this as a cabinet and as an administration, and also in engagement with opposition leadership, members of the opposition leaders. Yeah, you know what I mean. Leaders of the opposition and deputy leaders and opposition spokespeople of the various groups. And have come to the conclusion that whilst acknowledging what's in this report and the advice given, we believe it makes more sense, because given the gravity of the council owning private companies and where that should report to, rather than it reporting to a subcommittee of the cabinet, we feel it should be reporting to cabinet directly, as we think that would actually provide a greater amount of scrutiny to the public. And there's also just the logistics of it as well, and I think that's the direction we'll be going with the recommendations. But I note it that Councillor Mason wishes to make some comments or questions.
Well, it was on that point, Chairman. 4.1 on page 3, the company ownership function is an executive function of the council and therefore the responsibility of the cabinet to discharge. And I would like some further clarification on what is, if this subcommittee is to continue to have oversight rather than cabinet, where the division of responsibilities between this putative subcommittee and the cabinet lie.
Sophie, can you come back on that for us?
Yeah, of course. Cabinet took the decision in July 2020 to create the subcommittee to discharge the shareholder function, which, yes, is an executive function of the authority. It's those that are solely in relation to the shareholder and those that are constituted by way of each individual company constitutional documents. Those would go directly to this subcommittee rather than cabinet.
But presumably, should the cabinet decide to disband this committee, then those reports would by default then go to cabinet rather than the subcommittee that doesn't exist.
Agreed. So the July 2020 report was taken by cabinet to set up this committee. If cabinet wants to abolish it, it's in their gift to do so.
Wonderful, thank you. Judith, I think you were waving.
I'm new to this, and I'm not going to ask you to rehash everything or anything like that. I just have a general question. The role of this committee is oversight and approving business plans. It doesn't actually describe very well in here what recourse, what this committee would have to do if there are any problems or any potential falling out between the company and this company. I've done a lot of work in the past. People used to pay me vast sums to do governance for them, and I'm afraid I couldn't come here in all conscience and not mention this. It isn't clear from this document what would happen if there's a row, everything goes pear-shaped, and who would step in. Would that be a time the cabinet would meet? If so, they'd have to be very well informed to make a sensible decision in an emergency. And second of all, oversight and approving a business plan can be done quite badly. There's no real it sort of says robust and things in other times, but actually you have to judge the work of a subcommittee like this by what it actually achieves in terms of outcomes. And there's a lot of talk through here about alignment with the council's strategy, about social value, but it is really very vague and possibly too vague to allow any sensible negotiation or settlement be done. I'm not suggesting we don't, I think we should approve this. I'm sure that's what we need to do today. But if anybody wants me to observe places where that is particularly weak, I'd be very happy to help without charging my usual large fee. But it is weak on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mason, and we'll go back to Sophie should she have any comment.
Following on from that, if we look at the Appendix A, paragraph 2112, apart from presenting a strategic report, what would be the outcomes of this subcommittee? And were the subcommittee to find that something had gone horribly wrong, what action could the subcommittee take?
Hi, yeah, on that point, essentially the role of this committee is detailed in each individual's company constitutional document. So the difficulty we've got here is we're setting up and talking around it with actually getting into any of the detail of the companies. The role of the shareholder will be slightly different in each of those companies because the shareholding may be slightly different and the oversight. Essentially, the shareholder's role is oversight, scrutiny, but essentially it will be the directors that are carrying out the day-to-day running. So it is for the shareholder to observe and have an oversight of those companies. I think as it begins to be established and move forward and to have companies talking to it, in each individual company that shareholder role is separate and different for each of those because it has to be. I think a point that was raised is really key is that commerciality and the need for an understanding of what's best practice elsewhere. That was noted within this paper throughout, that it's a skill set that potentially isn't one that sits in the authority. Hence the recommendation to have local partnerships on board and as an advisor to this committee directly.
Thank you, Sophie. Any further comments or questions before we get to the recommendations? Okay, thank you, members. So, looking at the recommendations that are in front of us, my suggested edits would be that we delete recommendation 1, which is to agree the subcommittee meets in January, and instead replace it with the subcommittee agreeing a recommendation to Cabinet for the abolition of this subcommittee, and that all the work of this subcommittee instead reports into full Cabinet. So that's a recommendation from the subcommittee to Cabinet. Recommendation 2 to be slightly amended so that instead of delegating authority, etc., that we do so, but instead of for the meeting that now won't exist, that those papers and relevant reports be prepared for a future Cabinet meeting or the next Cabinet meeting. And on the last issue, we agree that we authorise the city solicitor, to engage the services of local partnerships to provide commercial advice to the subcommittee or to the Cabinet in relation to its companies going forward. Yeah, Judith.
In this context, does the word commercial advice mean helping? It's a very slippery word, commercial, because it's usually used in the private sector. But does it incorporate the advice that we needed for difficult decisions to balance the amount of surplus that's to be made and needs to be made, the amount of the flexibility in paying back loans, if there is any, and the social gain, for example, additional social housing on some sites? Does that include that? Because one would expect a company like Local Partnerships to be able to advise on all those things, not to set up a situation, if they're only focused on the profit motive, how would other discussions ever take place in a way that was profitable and well advised?
My hope is that the answer to that question is yes, but Sophie, could you confirm?
Yeah, exactly. And also as well, it was an understanding that they are, the subcommittee, albeit whatever form it takes, is part of that commission. So an understanding of their brief is agreed by the committee. It's just about engaging with them, seeing what they can offer, specific to each of these 7 companies, and then working that up alongside the committee cabinet.
Thank you.
I merely mentioned that because I think the paper that they've put in is very useful and very, very helpful, but it doesn't rely on or mention quite a lot of the fundamentals of public governance, which are to do with consultation, openness, transparency, where appropriate, and so on and so forth. And I was a little disturbed not to see that alongside the other things in there, which I thought were very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. I suppose there's an element of that part of the decision making still remains with us as the public authority to exercise that kind of due diligence expected of an authority, and perhaps the advice we might receive from an external person would be a different perspective. That's not to say they wouldn't give that advice as well. Is that fair to say, Sophie?
Yeah, exactly.
The most tricky thing, though, is balancing those out, and one would expect them to be able to advise on that, particularly if the Cabinet's not meeting very often on this. And the second thing is that that's the area in which we're going to have problems if there are big arguments going on and they have to be resolved, and one would want to have instructed. I mean, we're always instructing people to carry out public sector values through all our contracts in various different ways, so there's no different with this organisation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Brunt.
Thank you, Chair. It was just in response to the change in recommendation. I know I don't have a voting right in this, but obviously just as an observer. So the change of recommendation 1 is a question potentially to Cabinet members present. So is there potential to change to recommendation 1 to be the abolition of this committee? And if that is the change, and obviously that's what gets agreed on by voting members here, the question is what's changed since the Cabinet decision on the 14th of July 2020?
Well, I'm happy to give my thoughts on that, and if other Cabinet members wish to give thoughts, I think that's fair. I think we've learnt more, we've had much more discussion, time has passed. There's also been changes in the opposition group leadership in both of the main opposition groups, apologies. And I think those changes and the further discussion we've had, especially with the greater emphasis on transparency and openness and top-level scrutiny, and I think that narrative is even stronger in the public mindset thanks to our current government as well. And I think that's all part of the narrative, and that's why we're keen that this remains with Cabinet rather than a subcommittee, as unfortunately things do get lost in subcommittees. I don't know if other members want to comment. There's your answer. Thank you, Councillor Brent. And we have discussed with Councillor Bosher on this. So I think my suggested recommendation is clear, but we need to all agree on it. Voting members, what do we think? General nodding. Is general nodding okay? Wonderful. In which case, for the record, all 3 of the other voting members have agreed the recommendations, and we will move forward on that basis. Councillor Udy, apologies.
I don't wish to agree with that. Thank you. And I'm a voting member, right? Because I'm head of an oppositional group. We're non-voting, so why am I here?
To observe the democratic process.
So the first meeting of this was arranged. I had to book the day off work and it was cancelled, lost days' wages, and I've come here on my lunch to be told that I'm part of something that I'm not even voting on, to be told you're abolishing it. So, cheers, thanks a lot. I thought I was a voting member because I was like, so I'm just really confused now. So, thanks.
I can only apologise for any confusion that may have arisen, although I've really not been personally involved in what briefings.
So who are voting members, sorry?
In today, myself, Councillor Horton, Councillor Mason and Councillor Barrett, as it's a subcommittee of Cabinet, which is an executive function of the Council.
Okay, so why did you just create this in the first instance?
Well, I think, as per my response to Councillor Brent, things have changed over the last year or so, and a different view has been come to.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot. I'm going to leave soonish because I've got to go back to work, but thanks.
We always appreciate your presence, Councillor Udy. Chris Ward.
I just thought I'd add that whatever forum that you take, there was always intended to be an invitation to opposition members. So whether that be a subcommittee of the Cabinet or it be the Cabinet itself, the intention is that opposition members will always be invited along to those meetings. So, Councillor Udy, you would have been invited along whether this had been a subcommittee or whether it had been a Cabinet meeting. to deal with the same matters.
I was phoned specifically yesterday, asked about my attendance today, so I thought it was a lot more important, because I don't get phoned up the day before Cabinet, but I know I'm allowed to attend Cabinet, because sometimes I occasionally do, but considering this was called the Shareholders Committee before you changed it to the word subcommittee, like, a week ago, I don't know when you even changed that name, when you released the papers for this meeting, it's just largely confusing, and obviously we didn't... Could this have been an email?
Hopefully we can have moved forward with clarity from this point. Councillor Mason.
Consequent on the decision which we have just made, the membership of the subcommittee included non-voting members. Can we be assured that those members who are non-voting will, or their representatives will, have speaking rights on these matters when they come before Cabinet?
That sounds like something we can absolutely enable to happen. I look to our director level colleagues who are both nodding, so yes, thank you, Councillor
So they will
Mason.
have so opposition leaders or their deputies will have speaking rights at Cabinet when...
On issues in relation to shareholder issues, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I think that moves us on to the main business of this committee for however long the committee continues to exist, which it would seem will be a couple of months. Item 4 on the agenda, Ravelin Housing Limited. Who's presenting this? Tristan. Thank you very much.
So, as I mentioned, in my capacity as Director of Regeneration today, the purpose of the report was to update the committee on progress made by Ravelin Housing Limited against their current business plan, but also to seek approval for the company's new business plans, noting the ambition of the company and the need for future growth and investment to support their aspirations. And this paper, just to note, it builds on two previous papers, the last one taken to full council in February 2019. The recommendations are that the shareholder approve the new 5-year business plan and the investment and development plan as set out in the report. I would note that we have two of the Ravelin Housing directors here, should you have questions later on. We're asking to delegate to the Director of Regeneration, in consultation with the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer, to approve on behalf of the shareholder where we require the company to form new subsidiaries or acquire shares in other companies or participate in any partnerships or incorporate joint venture vehicles. And as long as it's provided in line with the business plan that we're asking you to approve in 2.1. I would note that this is for reasons to support some of the ongoing projects where we may need to move properties to different vehicles. We note that there is a development pipeline in the paper, and we want to make it clear that these are not sites in Ravelin Housing's ownership, but they speak to the aspiration of the company to want to work with the council to deliver property development on those sites. We also are asking the shareholder to endorse the appointment of non-exec directors to Ravelin Housing Limited based on the skills assessment contained in there. Non-exec directors bring with them their external experience, their private sector experience, and provide an extra layer of scrutiny to the company. And finally, we note the need to appoint permanent positions within Ravelin Housing, but not in this paper, as a future paper to come. Currently, all work is being done by council employees in their spare time, and that's not sustainable if we're going to run this company properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. I wasn't aware we allow people to have spare time. Thank you. Colleagues, I note there is a confidential appendix, Appendix 3. I'm keen to keep dialogue in the public domain, but should anyone wish to make reference to Appendix 3, then we will need to move to an exempt session. Can I just get a view whether people feel we need to do that or not? No. Councillor Mason? No. Councillor Smythe? No. Councillor Brent? No. Yep.
General point. I mean, I think I don't want to be specific about anything, but a quick skim of some of the pages here, I think does mean that we ought to be, when we're thinking about the task of unemployed people and indeed non-executives, we need them to have some understanding of the social objectives of the council alongside all the other qualities we've got, and that's not listed.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I'm sensing a theme from you today, a very important theme. Thank you. In which case, we'll move forward with comments and questions on the assumption we won't go into any of the detail in the confidential appendix. Comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Mason.
Page 118 of your papers, when we're talking about 2.4 alternative housing models. One of the opportunities RHL provides is the ability to disrupt failed markets and establish new ones. Not being a professional in this area, I don't quite understand what that means, and I would like an explanation of what that means so I understand what we can and what we cannot do within Ravelin.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I think we're looking to Tom for an answer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. In response to that, so Ravelin's aim and objective is to interfere with the market. It is to spur on development within the private sector, and it is obviously to deliver housing in a plethora of different tenure models. When we talk about a failed market, we talk about identifying gaps within the market where there is demand that isn't being met. If you look at the city in general, there are some absolutely fantastic opportunities to deliver different types of housing that isn't currently being delivered. The types of which could be things like specific build-to-rent properties. They could be things along the lines of different forms of shared ownership. As I say, there's a whole variety of things that would come in within that definition.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, does that help?
It's helpful, yes.
Wonderful. Councillor Smythe.
For that reason, I note the need for, somewhere it's written that Ravelin is looking for, non-executive directors, but also from staff. I wondered if the alternative of buying development services and indeed this ability to look for ways of disrupting the existing market could be explored, would be looking at housing associations. They've all got very capable development departments, and it might be worth looking there as well, because it's going to be a bumpy ride, the workload here, and to sustain a full team when you're only developing, 4 or 5 sites at any one time is quite inefficient if you have a big staff. Housing, I spent certainly 15 years of my career trying to do exactly that when I was development director of a housing association and buyer, and they are very skilled and are very good at taking an instruction and a commission from another body with which they would have some identification. You'd obviously have to interview and have to be very, pretty fierce on the fee and so forth, but it might be a good thing to investigate. Their development departments are very skilled.
Thank you. Mr. Southwell was nodding and Mr. Samuels has his hand up, so we'll go to Tristan.
Absolutely, councillors. We will talk to all sorts of partners, and we're in conversations with a number of RPs at the moment about where they're interested. We still will need some staff, and it's a skeleton staff. It's not a massive team. We are working predominantly with SLAs within council staff as well, but these council staff have day jobs too. So we're open to all sorts. We're interested in partnering with a number of local companies at the moment, and we're open to those conversations with RPs should you like to introduce us to anyone.
Good. You certainly need a good commissioning team back here, obviously, but
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Mason.
Coming back to the decision on what to build, how to build it. How will we develop Ravelin so that its policies and the policies of the housing section of the City Council can be in accord one with the other? Because there is a possibility that under a future administration may well have one view on what the city needs, and Ravelin may well have another view on what the city needs. So what is the mechanism by bringing these into accord?
Thank you, Councillor. I think from my perspective, that's where this committee or any future committee where the powers of this committee sit, i.e. the Cabinet comes in terms of approving the business plan on an ongoing basis, but I think that might be more, who wants to answer and give some more professional advice than I can?
So firstly, to say we like to work with the HRA and support the council's position, but we are filling a gap that sits alongside it. So we are not in conflict with, but supporting, and there may be opportunities where we can work with the HRA going forward. As far as our policies go, we wouldn't want to have policies within Ravelin that were conflicting with the HRAs or the current housing policies. We do have policies that look at things like key worker and looking at those people who are probably unlikely to get onto the housing waiting list, or on the housing waiting list, but are very unlikely to be housed in a reasonable time scale. So it's how do we support those other gaps while still supporting the council's aspirations.
This is the last thing I will ask.
It's okay.
Leading on from Councillor Mason's question there, here it says that the aim will be 30% of affordable housing. It's not defined whether affordable housing includes what we know as social housing, which is very important to us. So in other words, genuinely affordable, not just cheaper than the market, 20% cheaper than the market. That's the first question and the first point. And the second point is that I believe in the previous documentation I saw about Ravelin, it said 30% or more, or it said between 30 and 100%, and that doesn't seem to be here in this documentation. You can almost hear Councillor Corkery speaking through me at this point. We're entirely in agreement about this, and I wanted to make sure that was at least, I'm not saying you have to do, each site dictates for itself how it's going to work and how long we want to wait for a return. But the return on social housing long term is very good. It's just a very long time since till it breaks even. But that's the point really about just strengthening a little bit, the 2 or 3 times when affordable housing is mentioned, brackets some social housing please, and the percentage might be more than 30% on some council-owned sites, because that's the advantage of the council owning the site. So I would commend that to you on the Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we are all in agreement, and there was some general nodding behind you as you spoke. Does anybody wish to comment in addition to that? Yes, Wayne.
So the council already has a vehicle for delivering social housing, and that's the HRA, and that will continue. What Ravelin Housing allows us to do is do things that we can't do in the principle. And all the developments that we're looking at going forward, we will aspire to deliver 30% affordable housing if financially we're able to do so. And if we can exceed that, then we will do, if we're allowed to. And we might have to look at it on a portfolio basis over a number of developments. But sitting here today, the affordable, we feel that we should be delivering at least policy compliant to show the market that it can be done.
Thank you, Wayne. I think that end point around that thought leadership to demonstrate what is possible in the market in Portsmouth, because part of what Ravelin needs to and wants to achieve is about unlocking sites which have been dormant for a long period of time, and therefore the council demonstrating leadership through its own company is really important on this issue. Councillor Smythe.
I forgot to mention the green building standards that I think should be part and parcel of this, and I don't see mention of. I really will stop to.
Would anyone like to come back on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, can do briefly. There is a section in the business plan around corporate social responsibility that also talks about sustainable impact and working towards a carbon net zero goal. Clearly, there are elements there that do need to be further developed. In particular, we state within the business plan that we're working on a corporate social responsibility policy, which does need to be fleshed out, and we'd be absolutely happy to bring that back to committee, subcommittee, however that's formed, to discuss that in the future. But yeah, it's a very important point, and something that clearly, as we are seeking to make viable products that have a place in the market, the green credentials of those is absolutely essential.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Councillor Smart. I think it's safe to say that from an administration point of view, I think Councillor Barrett's position and existence on the Cabinet demonstrates that we are very much committed to the green agenda, and again, the fact that Councillor Barrett has been directly appointed to the subcommittee out of the potential 10 people that could have been, although we're now saying the subcommittee might not need to exist going forward, is another demonstration of our commitment to the Green Agenda. Councillor Brent.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just a very a brief, albeit naive question as well. So what is our definition of affordable housing? I know that's a question that's been asked a few times, but it'd just be interesting to have sort of our director's sort of opinion and perspective on that.
Wayne.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Yeah, we would take our definition from Homes England's definition of affordable housing. So that can be anything from shared ownership, socially rented housing, affordable rented housing, and anything else that's in between that, as defined by them.
Thank you both. Unless there are any further questions, I think it's really important that we do move Ravelin forward, and it's a key part of the city's regeneration plans going forward in unlocking sites that have been dormant for such a long time. Unless there are any other comments, I'd like to suggest we approve the recommendations as written in the agenda pack. General nodding. Wonderful. I think that's agreed, at which point that's the end of today's meeting. Thank you for everyone's time, and have a very Merry Christmas. I can say that now, can't I? Yeah, we can say that now.